Our next speaker hails from the Water Resources Agency. She is a water resources management professional with 15 years experience in the water sector, with specific experience in water resources and watershed assessments and planning, hydrological network design, integrated water resources management, along with public education and awareness. She possesses a bachelor's double major in environmental and natural resources management and also biology, and a master's in planning and development from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. She has conducted independent research in the fields for water and land use planning, land management, and also flooding. Here to tell us more about the use of technology in enhancing our country's resilience against flooding, please welcome our next speaker, Ms. Marissa McMillan.
Hello and good morning. Greetings to the officials of the Ministry of the Public Utilities, other government agencies, the Water Resources Agency of WASA, the Water and Sewage Authority, specially invited guests and fellow presenters. It is my distinct pleasure today to be able to speak to you on one of the projects that are very close to my heart, which is the Community Flood Early Warning Systems, otherwise known as the Seafuse Project. So the Seafuse Project is a project that was designed to reduce the impact of flooding throughout communities within Trinidad and Tobago. It is a project with a number of partners. It is a partnership between the Water Resources Agency of the Water and Sewage Authority, the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, the Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Societies, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, the Drainage Division of the Ministry of Works and Transport. Now, flooding is of major concern within Trinidad and Tobago, as at least one watershed is inundated every year, inundated or affected by floods. And the government spends millions of dollars on flood relief and restoration activities annually, right? In October 2018, floods would have affected 150,000 people from more than 4,000 households, and it would have impacted 75% of farmers within Trinidad and Tobago. Now, before this project was actually developed, it's important to know that we did have an adverse weather alert system. However, it did not reach down to the level of the communities. One of the other reasons why this project is so critical is because our flood management mechanism is actually very much fragmented. There are a number of organizations with roles in flooding. However, the roles tend to gel or move into each other. So then it's very much fragmented. And a number of the organizations don't have legislations to guide their activities as it relates to flooding and flood management. One of the other things that we need to know, that in the presence of climate change, the looming threat of climate change, and the fact that Trinidad is expected to experience longer periods of dry weather and then shorter periods of more intense rainfall, it's important that we invest in a flood management system for the country to incorporate all stakeholders, and that is what the Seafuse Project is all about. Now, flooding would have impacted communities in a number of different ways. And I'm just going to show you just a few images from our 2018 flood. So the first picture that you actually see there is in St. Helena, where a number of the properties would have been inundated, and the community really had to come out and actually rescue persons from their households. Good. And then also within that 2018 flood, I know that most persons would remember that a lot of persons, particularly persons that live in the southern part of the country or other areas of the country, and they were working in Port of Spain, they were basically left stranded because the highway would have been inundated, which would have disrupted movement. Right? And we could all remember the devastation that it would have had on areas like Greenvale, right? And beyond persons actually having their houses flooded out, there were a lot of long-term psychological impacts and a number of economic losses. There are persons who have not up to this point moved back into their houses. And when it relates to psychological impacts, I should let you know from a practitioner working in the field, sometimes when you go out there and you speak to the community, I remember Diego Martin in particular, after that flood that they would have experienced in 2012, they would have spoken about they become very much afraid to sleep when rain falls. So we can see here there is a serious problem as it relates to flood, and we need to do something about it. And hence, that is the reason why this project was birthed. So the Seafuse Project in itself consists of a number of different components. So the first thing, in order to be able to have an early warning system, you need to be able to detect floods. So one of the key things that we would have done was to enhance or upgrade our hydrological monitoring network systems. So that would have been actually putting in more stream flow gauges, and then also putting in rainfall stations, right? But the thing about it is these stations were placed in places whereby we would be able to detect floods, right, before they actually happen, and be able to provide enough warning to the communities. So aside from putting in these stations, we need to ensure that we get this information directly to the office. So we would have also improved our communication software to get the information directly from off the field into our offices. So when it's in our offices, we needed to have some display or portal to be able for persons who are not necessarily persons with a hydrological background to be able to understand what exactly is taking place, and to be able to predict or to be able to know when, hey, there is an issue and we need to respond, right? And that is the reason why the notification portal would have been developed, right? So the notification portal was developed in a way to input the information, but for persons to see. And when I say persons, I mean our partners, persons from the disaster management units, persons from other arms of local government, persons from ODPM, persons from Drainage Division, to be able to know that, hey, we have an issue and, there is an incidence of flood that is on the horizon. Because one of the things that the portal does is that it's able to show when we have thresholds being exceeded. Another component of this project is the community flood response. So yes, we have first responders, and those persons would be persons from the ODPM, persons from the disaster management units, persons from who are the CERTs who were arranged or who were taught and engaged by the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government. However, we needed to have other persons in the community to respond to the threats of flood. And that is where the community response plan would have come in, whereby communities were taught through the CERT program to develop their own plans to be able to respond. Because one thing that we know as practitioners in flooding is that when the flood is taking place, a lot of the persons that are supposed to respond first are nowhere there. They are at their homes, and they are unable to go in and render service to the community. And that is why the flood response at the community level is so very, very vital. When that data is collected, because that's one of the things that our community response persons would typically do, when that data is collected, the information is actually stored on our Seafuse app, which we will discuss, and I know there's another presentation that will highlight the Seafuse app, right? And this information, this flood information, would be able to verify certain claims as relates to flood relief and restoration efforts. It is also going to be used in overall flood management. It's going to be used in disaster management planning. It's going to be used in land use planning and how you would allocate land, and even things like insurances for particular areas. Good. So this slide is just another way of showing how the actual community flood early warning system actually works and the responsibilities of different persons. So I just want to show very briefly some of the work that would have been done. So these are some of the stations that we would have put in. This is actually the base of our stream flow station that we would have put in on the Pool River, and it is showing that, you know, the different partners would have come in and they would have contributed to the development of these stations. Good. Now, one of the things that you need to know is that these stations, you might want to know, okay, so why is the network in a way that we could not have, you know, predicted floods before? Now, there are a number of things. One, we would have had a very comprehensive network. However, over time, it would have been impacted by obsolescence of certain equipment, vandalization, sometimes, you know, normal wear and tear, and then some mix-match components because, you know, all those things happen with regards to the management of a stream flow station network, right? So these are two of the stations that would have been put in. Good. This is one on the Caroni River, in the vicinity of the Sir Solomon Hochoi Highway. Now, one of the critical things about this station is that it would tend to tell us when the actual highway is being inundated. All right, so that's one of the key things that you need to know with regards to that. The other station is a station that is actually on the Aruka River in the vicinity of the Tri-City Mall. Okay. The next component is the data and information portal. All right. As you can see, as we would have said before, you would see that there are a number of rainfall stations, rainfall being represented by green and in R with the letter R, and the stream flow station as in blue with, you know, S. So what it typically does is that it monitors the level of water within rivers throughout Trinidad and Tobago, and when there are when the volume of water within the river reaches particular thresholds, we have three thresholds. So we have a yellow level, we have an orange level, and we have a red level. So we would know that we can actually mobilize the communities to be able to start to respond to the threat of floods. Good. So as I would have mentioned, the Seafuse app before. So the Seafuse app was actually developed by the Adopt a River program on behalf of the Seafuse Project. All right. One of the key things about this app is that it will be available to the different communities, the different community members, to be able to map floods within their areas. All right. It does not. You don't need to have a ready supply of internet to be able to operate this app. Right, it takes up your location. It also has a number of emergency numbers readily accessible. Good. And it has a built-in map throughout Trinidad, for Trinidad and Tobago, with where the rivers are located, where crest gauges are located, and where a number of other disaster shelters and that type of thing is located. Good. The other component of it is the community early response teams, or the CERT training. All right, I actually have a component to deliver this weekend coming. All right, but in this training, persons are taught, one, how to respond to a flood. All right, how to respond to the threat of a flood, you know, and how to respond before, or how to act before a flood actually happens. So within this training, persons are taught how to develop their actual community flood response plans, and there's a component whereby you would actually have to create simulations whereby you can actually go in and ensure that it actually works. So when an event does take place, you're not just fishing around, but you know how to respond, where to respond. You know the persons within your community of greatest needs. You know the areas within your communities that are most impacted. And then there's also a very heavy first aid component. So if someone is injured, you can render support. Right. So after a flood takes place, right, this is what we actually do with the data. We create flood maps, and as I would have said before, this information is used for a number of different applications. It's used for research, it is used for disaster planning, it's used for land use planning, it can be used for insurance purposes, it could be used for verification, it can be used for a number of both community-based and academic purposes. The other picture is actually of a crest gauge, which is one of the gauges that we use to collect flood information on the ground. So the benefits of a project of this nature, right? So one of the things that we would have done is that we would have improved our hydrological monitoring network. You cannot have an early warning system if you cannot detect that a flood is going to take place. Then we would have also allowed for greater communication between the persons with the information, which is the Water Resources Agency, and the persons that are required to respond. And not respond a day later, but respond on a very timely basis, right? So to be able to galvanize communities to safeguard themselves and their property. Another key thing that this project would have done is that it would have bridged the gap that fragmented legislation and fragmented institutional goals would have left, because it would have created a number of different synergies for greater collaboration, right, between the different agencies. Aside from our main partners, there were a number of other partners that would have contributed. To note, the Met Services would have given some level of technical support in terms of reviewing certain things and their expertise with regards to this project. Secondly, the IMA would have given their support in terms of assisting with particular geospatial analysis and then also with some flood mapping exercises. Good. Then one of the things that you should also know is that as practitioners within the flood management field, it all gave us an opportunity to pool the limited resources that we all had to make something spectacular, which is to reduce the impact of flooding within communities throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Good. We would have also created a platform to be able to store information as it relates to flood events that could be used for a number of different purposes, and that can be available to a number of different stakeholders. We would have also empowered communities to respond to the threat of floods. Beyond that, we would have built the capacity both in the organizations, right, to be able to monitor, map, analyze, and forecast floods, right? And this would result in enormously great support to flood relief and flood restoration efforts throughout the country. And the way forward. So through the ODPM, we would have gathered some resources to be able to enhance the project a little bit further. This funding would have come from the UNDP, and some of the things that are going to take place on the second phase of the project, otherwise known as the strengthening of the Seafuse, is that we are going to, one, be able to put in more stream flow gauges and rainfall gauges throughout Trinidad and Tobago. We are also going to, instead of just having the portal available to persons within the partnership, it is actually going to be on a website that persons throughout Trinidad and Tobago can access and be able to know that when there is a threat of a flood within a particular area. Additionally, some of the things that they would be looking at is studying flood and its impact from a gender perspective. Good. Beyond that, they would be doing a number of investments in terms of building the capacity of persons that actually work in the flood management field, right? So those are some of the things that we would be going to do under the project that would have been through the resources that we would have gained from the UNDP, right? Under the field of empowerment of the communities to mitigate floods, we would also be teaching them how to do some geospatial type modeling, right? Some flood modeling and also some measure of flood mapping, right? So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Marissa McMillan.